welcome into the horse race. I'm your host, Daniel Vaughn. We're back this week after all the Thanksgiving holidays are done, covering all the latest in news, polling, and more. So, for those of you who are new, I'm a columnist at the Conservative Institute, where I write a column on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, where I cover everything that's happening in the news, legal, law, culture, anything that's happening. We're going to touch on some of that here tonight. I'm also write a once a week newsletter. Goes out on Friday at the Beltway Outsiders. You get all that. It's all free. So, please feel free to sign up. The links are in the show notes and elsewhere on this page. So, tonight, what I want to do though is I want to touch on the big stories happening tonight, which are frankly, it's the pardons that Joe Biden is handing out. So, obviously, you had the Hunter Biden pardon that came out, which is the first one that Joe Biden's done here. That's huge and needs to be covered. And there's been a lot of discussion about that, but we're going to cover that is how we're going to be moving beyond that and moving beyond that pretty rapidly. There's been just some discussion in DC specifically about whether or not this necessitates a constitutional crisis. I think that's ludicrous, but we're going to go through some of the arguments being made, specifically in the Atlantic by David Froome, and we're going to kind of cover that ground. We're going to cover Donald Trump's popularity with his transition team. If you look at the polls, he's broadly popular right now for the first time, frankly, in his entire political career. So there's a lot happening all at once, and so we're going to dive into all of it. The first thing I want to start off, though, is with this piece in the Atlantic. It's written by David Froome, and it's called A Constitutional Crisis Greater Than Watergate. And what he is alleging is that Donald Trump's decision to nominate Kash Patel to fill the spot on the FBI is a constitutional crisis. And the way he comes to this is that each FBI director is given a 10-year term to serve out their time in office. And every president can either choose to leave that person in that term or they can replace him. Totally open to the president. If the president doesn't act or anything, it just keeps somebody in that role so that the spot is never open. So that means you've always got an FBI director for the most part. If the term runs up and the president doesn't nominate anybody, that could create some problems. But otherwise, this ensures that you've always got somebody in that top officer style role, which is also in the Department of Justice. You have your attorney general, and then you've got your FBI director right under that. So what Froome and others are arguing is that Donald Trump replacing Christopher Wray, who's in the middle of a 10-year term right now, amounts to a constitutional crisis. And it's just ludicrous on its face. They allege that there's some kind of unwritten rule in D.C. that you only replace the FBI director, if there's some serious misconduct, and that's also ludicrous on its face. There is no rule. The FBI director can be replaced for any decision. He or she serves at the president's express will, and if the president decides he wants to get rid of the FBI director, he can do so, and then he or she would just name a replacement. And so right now, you've got Donald Trump saying he's going to put Kash Patel in there, which means that he's going to kick out Christopher Wray. When Bill Clinton decided to do this in 1993, and he kicked out Bill Sessions, there was no broad discussion on whether or not this was a power that he didn't have. There was no constitutional crisis. Clinton decided that he was going to allege there was misconduct on the place of Sessions and then put it his own guy. That FBI director that he proceeded to put in was kind of a disaster, but that was Clinton's prerogative. He was allowed to do so. Trump is allowed to do the same thing here. He can fire Christopher Wray. Right now, if Joe Biden wanted to ditch Christopher Wray, he could do so and put somebody else in there. It wouldn't amount to anything because we just got a few months left here, but this person serves at the president's discretion. The 10-year term is a thing that exists that was put in there after Watergate, but it is not something that overrules the president's will in deciding something. So by declaring a constitutional crisis, David Froome and his ilk are just declaring something that doesn't exist. This is not a constitutional crisis. This is Donald Trump operating within the realm of putting a person into a spot. He's nominating someone and putting that person through the nomination process as prescribed in the Constitution. He's doing this in many other positions. This is not the definition of a constitutional crisis. This is a made-up crisis by Froome and others. In fact, I'll show you what an actual constitutional crisis gets in. We're going to touch on two foreign countries here who are going through an actual constitutional crisis. First up is France. You may have seen some news stories this week about how France, its government has fallen, and that is in fact true. There's been there are loggerheads over the funding of their equivalent of Social Security and some of the other social programs. There's a vote of no confidence, and so the prime minister is gone, and so you've got Emmanuel Macron at the top of the government, and he effectively does not have a functioning government right now. He's got to figure out how does he govern here. He is unable to actually call a snapped election right now. Because under law he called one in the summer, so he can't call one until next summer. So the French government right now is dead in the water. This is a great piece in Politico that kind of talks through you know, what's going to happen. So, there's not going to be any elections. Macron's going to be in that seat until 2027, unless he decides to step down. He's got to figure out can he appoint a new prime minister? Can he cobble together a governing coalition in the time here? That's up in the air. So whether or not France has an acting government in any form is up in the air. This is a constitutional crisis. This is a French constitutional crisis because they don't really know how they're going to function from now through next year until they can hold snap elections again, and even beyond that. Emmanuel Macron's going to have to decide. I mean, right now he's saying I'm not going to resign, but it may be one of those things where he may be forced to because there's going to be no other way to have a functioning government in France. This is a constitutional crisis. That's what that looks like. South Korea, you have their president randomly declaring martial law for apparently no reason at all. There's no real discernible reason why that took place. And now both parties are probably going to impeach him. He also replaced the defense chief as well. So you have an outright constitutional crisis in South Korea because you had the president trying to overrule the entire system, declare martial law, and close down all the government buildings. And it's taking the parliament of South Korea to sit here and bring things back together here. So this is what a constitutional crisis looks like. It's a country that doesn't know what's happening. They're having to impeach their president because he decided to use the martial law powers in ways they haven't seen literally since, basically the Korean War. So this is what a constitutional crisis looks like. Donald Trump nominating somebody and replacing the head of the FBI, that's not a constitutional crisis. No matter how hard he tries to determine here if there's some kind of fake requirement here, some unwritten rule. All the rules for all the executive officers and all the cabinet officials are laid out in the Constitution or under statute, and Donald Trump is operating under those. Just because Froome and others doesn't like Kash Patel, that doesn't make it a constitutional crisis. Not even close to it, frankly. They may think he's awful, but that's not a crisis. This is the system working as it is designed. And we all know, I mean, you can look at the Biden administration, you can look at the Obama administration, they nominated a lot of people who were either not qualified or horrible at these jobs. I mean, you can look at another instance of Pete Buttigieg as the transportation secretary, and he's been an outright disaster for the last 4 years. He still got nominated and he still went through. That wasn't a constitutional crisis. It created a lot of other problems, but it was not a constitutional one. So this is a made-up thing that the Atlantic and others on the left are trying to put out, frankly, to delegitimize what Donald Trump's doing. And frankly, this is what you call delegitimizing the system. They launch all these sorts of attacks about how Donald Trump tears down institutions, but when he's operating as any other president has done within the system, that's when they're trying to actually tear down the actual system. So this is a bizarre piece. It's a bizarre argument, but it is one of the, Froome is one of the leading writers on the left, and the Atlantic always touts everything he writes. So you have to address these sorts of things as they come up, even though it is utterly ridiculous. Again, constitutional crisis, France. Constitutional crisis, South Korea. United States, we're operating exactly how we should. This is what you would expect. And frankly, so do the American people think that. Right before Thanksgiving, CBS News ran a poll that found that Donald Trump's transition period here is broadly approved of by most Americans. You dig down into it, and 59% of Americans approve of the way he's handling the transition. They feel good largely about how he's going to do as president and everything. So again, this is a broadly popular president right now. He's in his honeymoon period, as you would expect with most presidents in this time of the cycle. He hasn't been, officially inaugurated yet, but Americans are looking at him and saying everything's good. This is kind of what we expected. He's nominating people. He's pulling some people back. So everything that is happening in this transition process is happening according to what's laid out in the Constitution, and Americans look at it and say, yeah, this is kind of what we would expect. It's broadly approved. They like the people. There are obviously some that they like more than others. Congress is kind of dealing with some of that too, but for now, Trump is getting the benefit of the doubt. He won the election. He won the popular vote, and people expect him to be able to nominate who he wants. On the flip side, that is not so true on the left. If you get a chance, I would read this piece over at the Liberal Patriot. They're a group of Democratic writers who are really smart. They write about how the left flank is an albatross on the left. And specifically, they go into how Harris couldn't shake the fact that she was an extremist. And so this is when you get into like the squad side of the Democratic Party, your AOCs, your Tlaibs, those sorts of people. And they found that basically moderates are outperforming Biden, Harris, and everybody else. So why is everybody trying to kowtow to the far left of the party when we should be promoting the more moderate wing, which is winning seats and outperforming the broader party? It's a great question, and they are laying out here that the far left is an albatross around the Democratic Party. So you've got these two things happening here that is sort of leading to a broader fight within the Democratic Party, because you have a very popular Donald Trump and a very unpopular left flank of the Democratic Party that's driving the Democratic Party crazy, because they're having to figure out, well, how are we going to win elections when we've got these guys who probably cost us an election, probably cost Harris an election, because she could never explain why she was agreeing with these guys on the far left, and yet here we are in loser's seat. So that's kind of where we are on a political basis. You've got the Democratic Party, which is at odds with itself. You've got a broadly popular Donald Trump transition team right now. And you've got these liberal writers who are arguing about a very bad constitutional crisis. Well, what Trump's doing right now is not the constitutional crisis, not even close. What is the constitutional crisis, and what could be one, is the pardons that Joe Biden is handing out. Now, the actual process here that Biden is following is fine. That's not the actual crisis. It's the scope of what he could potentially be doing here that could create the actual crisis, because it's going to create potentially some forms of pardons that we've never seen before. So what I'm going to do here is show you the actual text. So this is the statement on the White House's website. They released a full statement where he kind of, they just named it statement from President Joe Biden, which is hilarious. If you didn't know any better, you would just think of some random statement. But this is the one where he's pardoning Hunter Biden. So they give a full statement here. You can kind of ignore that part. We're going to go down here to the actual text. So this is, if you're a lawyer, this is what you care about the most. And this is where you get the full thing, where it says the president, it announces to everyone, and they announced all the powers here, that Hunter Biden gets a full and unconditional pardon. So it means he's pardoned of absolutely everything. It's not, pointed towards a specific crime, a specific instance. If you read the statement up here, you'll see him talking about, the tax evasion things, the gun charges. So in his proclamation, he starts talking about specific things. But in the actual pardon, it's not about that at all. It's a full and conditional pardon from January 1st, 2014 to December 1st, 2024. Now, I wrote a column kind of going through some of the things here about this, talking about how Joe Biden will pardon the rest of his family and more. I had another one the previous day on Monday that kind of went into this too. And the key part about to understand this is that it goes back to January 2014. Because that same year, the spring of 2014, that's when you get Hunter Biden getting his special business deals in Ukraine. So for all the talk about how this is about, the unfair gun charges, the unfair tax evasion things that, Hunter Biden was charged with and convicted of and, had all the plea deal stuff with, this pardon is not about that at all. This is about everything that Hunter did as a part of Ukraine, everything that he did that may have used his father's name as a form of pay to play, where he was trying to, ride the coattails of his dad and try to make money off of that. When the House Republicans were investigating this is what they were looking at. Everything up here, the tax and gun charges and all that type of stuff, that was ancillary. That was secondary. And this is all fluff. The real meat is what happened during this decade, because this goes back into Joe Biden's time as vice president, and then his time out of office, and then his time, going up in 2024, it goes through his administration. So this is, nearly 11 years here of conduct from one person. Now the language here it is unusual because this is only the second type of pardon that I've been able to track down like this. The only other one that you're going to find like this that I've seen is Richard Nixon's pardon. So when Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon of everything, he used similar language. So he said, he comes down here to the proclamation and he uses all the powers and he says that he gets a pardon of, he gets a complete pardon of everything that he may or may not have committed. So all acts, offenses against the United States, which he has committed or may have committed from January 20, 1969 through 1974. Effectively, he was covering all of his presidency here. So this covers anything that Nixon may have done while as president. So this language here is very similar to how they designed the Hunter Biden one. And it's almost verbatim, especially when you're talking about the date frame here. You're getting a full and conditional pardon for this date range of anything that may have happened through there. They do name the cases here, but what everyone's noting is that that's secondary to the meat here, what it covers, because all the rest of this here is secondary to that. So you've got this following along with the Nixon pardon, which itself was sort of unprecedented because you had Ford basically saying, I don't want any prosecution of the president. We just need this all to end. So I'm going to pardon him of absolutely everything that could have happened here. We're just going to wipe it out in this, and everybody goes along their way. That is a smart pardon by Ford, by the way. It kind of helped calm all the issues in the country. People were able to move on. Obviously, the country ended up moving on to Carter, and you have obviously Democrats flooding in that midterm, that cycle. But still, it ended up just cutting this entire controversy off. Watergate effectively ended as a thing that distracted the country, and everybody was able to move on. That's not going to be the case here because this is only the beginning. Biden puts this out on December 1st and then proceeds to travel off to Africa. It is a bizarre thing. This is the type of pardon that you would expect a president to announce at the very end. As he's walking out the door, he puts a stamp on this as his power is leaving and he can't do anything anymore. This is the type of pardon that he's doing here. Biden is doing this December 1st. This is sort of interesting because it suggests that we have even more here. And that's kind of what I got into in my column over here, that you would expect him not only to pardon Hunter Biden, but possibly the rest of his family and even more people. Now, when I wrote this, I didn't know what was about to come out at Politico because Politico is now reporting that the Biden White House is discussing preemptive pardons for those in Trump's crosshairs. Now, the way that Politico is framing this is that this is the Biden White House trying to protect people from the unfair and potential attacks that Trump's people are going to launch at them. So everything that Trump could potentially do, any of his nominees could do to go after anyone for their actions in government is deemed, preemptively deemed unfair and a form of lawfare. There's no talk about how this could be, a form of accountability. So what they're wanting to do is to issue preemptive pardons for everyone. What they're talking about is getting the same kind of pardon here, covering all their acts. In this case, I don't know if they'd go back to 2014, but they definitely would cover the entirety of Joe Biden's presidency or their time within the White House. So you'd get this similar language to Nixon and Hunter Biden, but you would apply it to other people. You're talking about people maybe like a Jill Biden. You're talking maybe somebody like James Biden, Joe Biden's brother, who has been talked about with some different DOJ investigations relating to how he has also used his brother names to try to get in on deals. And so these preemptive things it's a debate happening within the White House. The interesting thing here, though, is if you sort of get down into the actual reporting, it says that the West Wing deliberations have been organized by White House counsel Ed Siskel and include other aides, but the president himself is not really involved with this. So this piece is coming out while Joe Biden is in Africa. This is a bizarre thing to be coming out because they're talking about what type of pardons Biden is going to lay out, and Biden is not a part of this at all. So this is the White House staff talking about how they can get Biden to pardon all these different people. for these different things. And they're talking to Congress because they're wanting to potentially give pardons to people like Adam Schiff. They're wanting to talk about getting pardons to Liz Cheney, everyone who's involved in the January 6th investigations. Um, so it's just this really, really broad thing. And for some of these people who are in these discussions, they're a little bit scared of that because if they take a pardon, that suggests that they had bad acts for which they need a pardon. And also similar to Hunter Biden, Andrew McCarthy in National Review and Alan Dershowitz in the Daily Mail both suggested that with Hunter Biden, if he, with his pardon, since he's now no longer able to claim that he can be prosecuted for these things, he can now be forced to testify before Congress and other places because he has no fear of incrimination, at least in a federal sense. And so his right to remain silent is sort of gone. And so they can now pressure him to testify about what happened during this time to then go after all the other people who are involved or get to the bottom of all of it. So there is some potential real things where people who take pardons could then be brought in to answer questions about this. And if they lied about it or they refuse to answer, those are forms of obstruction and perjury, which can be then prosecuted. Those will not be covered by any pardon. So this is a constitutional crisis. Let's go back here to the beginning where we started out here. Donald Trump nominating someone is a constitutional crisis, according to David Truman, The Atlantic. That's not. That's just Donald Trump following the rules. This, however, is a constitutional crisis because preemptive pardons like this have never been done. Not at this scope, not to this extent, and not in this way, because you're talking about just naming off a time period here, like with Nixon or like with Hunter Biden here. We're just basically saying whatever they did, you cannot go after them for what they did in office over this. So it's just effectively blanket pardons for everyone. And that is a wild concept because it effectively means that one administration is attempting to prevent anyone, absolutely anyone, from getting any clarity or any accountability for what they did while they were in office. And even if you use something like FOIA to, make everything public, even if all that happened, you likely would not be able to prosecute them or go after them for what happened in their time in office. So this is the actual constitutional crisis here. And whether or not this actually happens is obviously remains to be seen. But I do believe we're going to see other pardons. And what's going to get interesting politically, this is about Joe Biden and his powers. It's about Joe Biden and his family versus everyone else. Joe Biden's a pretty spiteful man, and he was just shoved out by the Democratic Party. And Harris was then run in his place. He was kicked out at the top of the ticket. He believes he would have won. And now he's being told, well, now you need to pardon all these people, some of whom who are responsible for kicking you out of office. I don't know how well he or the rest of that family is going to go for that because if you saw any of the videos out of Angola and some of the stuff out of Africa, he still doesn't look like he's all there. Some of the other videos that we've seen of this guy, they just don't look like he's there. So the extent of who is actually making the calls on these pardons is an open question at this point. And I firmly believe, I know he was involved with Hunter Biden one because he's been thinking about it since June, according to NBC News. And anyone with a brain knew that. As soon as he stepped down, you knew immediately, well, whoever wins this race, it doesn't matter. He's going to end up pardoning Hunter Biden. That's just something that's going to happen. So this is the actual constitutional crisis here. It's how far do these preemptive pardons go? And then is Biden actually willing to give these out to all the people who want them? Because if they are the reason that he's not still in office, he's not inclined to help them out at all. So you could see in the next 2 months some infighting, particularly in the White House, over people who Biden may deem as disloyal or the Biden family may deem as disloyal to them. So this is not just about, covering up wrongs and rights. I do believe, this is just the White House leaking to Politico, this is what we're talking about and everything, without fully factoring in the politics behind it, without fully factoring in Joe Biden could come in and be pretty vindictive here. So that's going to be the big story here. Does this happen? Who does Biden decide to give more of these to? Within his family, I think that's easy. You'll see pardons for James Biden, just like you got with Hunter Biden. He'll protect his family. How far it goes after that is going to be the open question because it's going to depend on, Do these people try to kiss up to Joe Biden to get what they want and kiss up to his family? That's unclear. So this is going to be the big thing for the next 2 months. You'll have Trump sort of tootling along here, doing his transition, nominating people, and getting ready for Inauguration Day. He's obviously doing the international press with statements on Hamas and those sorts of things. But on the flip side here, you've got Joe Biden, and this question of who and when he's going to pardon everyone is a big question because normally the Hunter Biden one is the last pardon you issue, not the first big one. And the fact that it's the first big one suggests that it's the first of many to come. So I don't actually believe the White House when they say, oh, we're just now beginning to think about this. No, they're just beginning to now publicly talk about the fact that this is a reality that they want. They're trying to prevent any form of accountability, any form of light hitting whatever they did during their time in office. And from a pure democracy standpoint, that's an attack on democracy. When you're preventing transparency and accountability from going into any form of system, that is anti-democratic. That is your basic form of fascism. They don't seem to realize that, but that's where we are. So this is going to be the actual crisis moving forward, and how the Biden administration navigates this is going to determine a lot. And I think you're going to see a lot more leaks like this because there's been others. John Dean, the famous Watergate attorney, he's been calling for these types of preemptive pardons. There have been a few others on MSNBC that have cited as my columns. So this is not just the White House. You're seeing a lot of prominent commentators come out on the left and say the same thing. We need these sorts of things. That's a wild thing to ask because this has never been done. But we'll see. We'll see. This is going to be the big thing. And, Trump's coming in January 20th. So Joe Biden's got him until the 19th to figure out what he's going to do. We'll see up until then. So that's all I've got for tonight. Keep watching these stories because I suspect they're going to be dropping. You're going to see more leaks out of the White House about this. You're probably going to see leaks out of Congress about this too, as some of the people in Congress may want some of these pardons. But, we'll see from there. So that's all I've got tonight. I will talk to you guys next week and continue to have a blessed night and a blessed week.